The evening air in Enugu was thick with the scent of blooming frangipani as Adaora sat beside her mother on the veranda. Her father, a retired professor, cleared his throat and placed a hand on her knee. "Nene, we have found a good man for you," he said. Chinedu is a software engineer in Lagos, educated, successful, and from a respectable family. Adaora's heart fluttered, not with excitement, but with the weight of expectation. She had always trusted her parents' judgment, yet something inside her whispered that love should be more than a checklist. Later that night, as she scrolled through her phone, a message popped up from an unknown number. "You left your book at the cafe today." Attached was a photo of her well-worn copy of Things Fall Apart. Confused, she replied, "Who is this?" The response came swiftly, "The stranger who saved it from the rain. My name is Tunde." Little did she know, this accidental meeting would unravel the carefully laid plans of her future. Adaora had always loved the quiet hum of Cafe Sankofa, where she spent her afternoons grading papers. That day, a sudden downpour had sent her rushing out, forgetting her book. When she returned the next morning, the barista smiled and pointed to a tall, broad-shouldered man in the corner. "He kept it safe for you," she said. Tunde looked up, his dark eyes warm with amusement as he handed her the book. "You're a teacher?" he asked, noticing the red pen marks on her fingers. Their conversation flowed effortlessly. He was a wildlife conservationist from the Yoruba tribe, visiting Enugu for a conference. Unlike Chinedu, whose texts were polite but formal, Tunde spoke with passion about his work, his laughter deep and infectious. By the time they exchanged numbers, Adaora felt a spark she couldn't ignore. That evening, she stared at her phone, torn between duty and desire. A week later, Adaora hesitantly told her parents about Tunde. To her shock, her father leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Oh, Tunde Olewale. I know his father, we attended university together." Her mother nodded approvingly. "A man who protects the land is a man who protects his family." Adaora's jaw dropped. Where was the resistance she'd feared? Meanwhile, Chinedu's visits grew more frequent, his gifts extravagant, a gold bracelet, a designer handbag. Yet his conversations felt rehearsed, his smiles never reaching his eyes. One night, as Tunde video called her from a forest reserve, his face lit up as he showed her a rescued eagle. "This is what love should feel like," she whispered to herself. Adaora's heart raced as she smoothed down the folds of her yellow gelly, glancing at her reflection one last time. She had agreed to meet Tunde at the Botanical Gardens, a neutral, public place, yet intimate enough for conversation. When she arrived, he stood by a towering baobab tree, holding 2 coconut shells filled with fresh palm wine. "A peace offering from my village," he said with a grin. She laughed, sipping the sweet, tiny drink as he led her through the garden, pointing out rare plants and their medicinal uses. As the sun set, they sat by a koi pond, their fingers brushing accidentally. Tunde's voice grew serious. "Adaora, I know your parents have other plans for you. I don't want to come between you and your family." She looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. "Let's take it one day at a time," she replied. That night, she dreamed not of Chinedu's polished Lagos apartment, but of Tunde's hands, rough from fieldwork, holding hers. Chinedu arrived for Sunday lunch impeccably dressed, bearing imported chocolates and a bottle of champagne. Adaora's mother fussed over him, while her father discussed tech investments. Adaora played the role of the dutiful daughter, but her mind wandered to Tunde's stories of camping under the stars. When Chinedu mentioned his upcoming trip to Dubai, she blurted, "Do you ever miss Nigeria when you're away?" He paused, then said, "Business comes first." The table fell silent. Later, her mother pulled her aside. "Nene, Chinedu is a good man, but your happiness matters." Adaora's eyes widened. Was her mother giving her permission to choose? That evening, she video called Tunde, who was roasting yams over a fire. "Tell me about your day," he said. And for the first time, she felt the balance of her world shifting. Auntie Ngozi's visit brought chaos. Yoruba man. Huh. Do you want your children to forget their roots? She hissed. Adaora clenched her fist, but Ton's calm voice echoed in her mind. Prejudice is ignorance wearing tradition's clothes. She stood tall. Auntie, love doesn't erase heritage, it multiplies it. Her father, overhearing, surprised everyone by nodding. My best friend was Hausa. Love is love. Meanwhile, Tan faced his own trials. His uncle warned, Igbo women are too headstrong. Tan laughed. Good. I like a challenge. That weekend, he took Adaora to a Yoruba festival, where they danced to the talking drum. As their bodies moved in sync, she realized, this was a choice. No more shadows. Adaora found a handwritten note slipped under her door one evening. It was from Tunde, a poem comparing her smile to the sunrise over the Niger River. Her fingers trembled as she traced the words, her heart swelling. But beneath the joy, doubt crept in. What if this is just a fleeting passion? She tucked the letter under her pillow, where it stayed like a sacred secret. By glittering screens and polished speeches, she felt out of place. When he introduced her as my future wife, her stomach twisted. Later, she confided in her journal, Tan sees me. Chinedu sees a trophy. A storm raged outside when Tan's call woke Adaora at 2 a.m. I'm tracking poachers near the reserve, he whispered urgently. If I don't call back by dawn, the line went dead. Adaora spent the night pacing, praying to ancestors she hadn't invoked in years. At sunrise, her phone buzzed, a photo of Tunde, muddy but triumphant, with a rescued elephant calf. You were my strength, he texted. In that moment, she knew, love wasn't just comfort, it was courage. The next day, Chinedu complained about her distracted air. You're always on that phone, he scoffed. She didn't bother to explain. Tunde took Adaora to the Ayo festival in Lagos, where towering masked dancers moved like spirits. Amid the crowd, he tied a beaded bracelet around her wrist, a Yoruba symbol of protection. Now you carry my people with you, he said. An elder eyed them and muttered, strange pair. Tunde simply grinned. Strange is good. That night, Adaora's father asked about the bracelet. When she revealed its meaning, he sighed. Your mother wore one just like it when we were young. Hers was Igbo. The unspoken truth hung between them, love had always been their family's silent rebellion. On the way back from a visit to Tunde's village, their car sputtered to a halt in the bush. As dusk fell, Adaora panicked, but Tunde calmly gathered firewood. Ever roasted corn under the stars? He asked. They shared stories, hers of classroom chaos, his of lion cubs stealing his boots. When a truck finally stopped to help, Adaora was almost disappointed. Chinedu, hearing of the ordeal, scolded her recklessness. Tunde sent a meme of a grinning goat caption *, we survived. * She deleted Chinedu's message. Tunde's grandmother demanded to meet Adaora. The old woman circled her, pressing a kola nut into her palm. Break it, she commanded. When Adaora split it cleanly, the room erupted in cheers. She has the hands of a born healer, Grandma declared. Later, Tunde confessed, if the knot had shattered, she'd have sent you away. Adaora gasped. And you let me risk that? He kissed her knuckles. I knew you wouldn't fail. Meanwhile, Chinedu's mother sent a code email, *, we expect you at our family retreat. Adaora replied with a photo of the Kola Nut ritual. The response? Radio silence. During a teachers' conference in Ibadan, Adaora sneaked away to Tunde's conservation camp. They stole kisses between tents, giddy as teenagers. A sudden downpour sent them sprinting to his cabin, where they dried off by the fire. He played her a folk song on his guitar, substituting her name into the lyrics. Outside, the rain drummed a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Back at the hotel, a bouquet from Chinedu waited, stiff roses, no note. She gave them to the receptionist. Ton's uncle called a family meeting. Why not a Yoruba girl? They demanded. Ton stood firm. Adaora's heart is my home. When they turned to her, she served them palm wine with the steady hands of an Igbo daughter. I will learn your ways, she promised. One elder snorted, but another smiled. She has spirit. That night, Adaora's mother braided her hair tightly. You're walking 2 parts now, NWAM. Don't stumble. Chinedu arrived unannounced, demanding answers. Is it true? You're choosing that bushman. Adaora fled to her childhood treehouse, where Ton found her hours later. He climbed up, balancing 2 bowls of pepper soup. Eat, he ordered. Between spicy slurps, she confessed her fears. What if we lose ourselves? Ton wiped her tears with his thumb. Love isn't about losing. It's about multiplying. Adaora stood between 2 invitations, Chinedu's yacht party in Lagos, and Ton's village naming ceremony. Her father handed her car keys. Go where your feet take you, not your fears. She drove straight to the bush, arriving as Ton was bestowed his grandfather's name, Adoroju, one who weaves destinies. When their eyes met across the fire, she whispered, Asterisk, I choose you. Asterisk. And so, under a sky ablaze with stars, Adaora and Ton began their journey, a love written not in chapters, but in shared sunrises, whispered promises, and the unshakable belief that some choices are written in the stars. The morning after the naming ceremony, Adaora woke to find Ton already gone from their shared hut. On the wooden stool sat a steaming bowl of oji and a note, gone to check there. Now hers too. The pap was perfectly sweetened, just how she liked it. How had he learned her preferences so quickly? That afternoon, while helping Ton's mother pound yam, the older woman suddenly asked, Do you know why our people say love is like pounded yam? Adaora paused, her peso hovering. Because it takes work to make it smooth. Mama Ton laughed. No, child. Because even when it's hot and difficult to handle, it's the most satisfying thing you'll ever taste. News came that Chinedu had fallen ill in Lagos. Against Ton's gentle protest, Adaora traveled to visit him. The hospital room stank of antiseptic and regret. Chinedu, thinner now, grasped her hand. I thought success was everything, he rasped. But seeing you choose love over comfort, it broke something in me. She stayed 3 days, reading him newspapers and adjusting his pillows, not as a lover, but as a friend who remembered their shared childhood. When she returned, Ton was waiting at the bus station with 2 coconuts and no questions. That night, as fireflies danced around them, he said simply, You have the biggest heart of anyone I know. And she knew then that trust, not passion, was love's truest measure. The rainy season came early, washing out the only bridge to Ton's conservation site. For 2 weeks, they were separated, Adaora grading papers by lantern light, Ton stranded with his team. Their only communication was through a crackling radio in the village square. One evening, through static, he sang her an old Yoruba lullaby. The entire village fell silent to listen. Even stubborn Auntie Ngozi wiped her eyes. When the waters receded, Adaora waded across the still-swollen stream to find Ton asleep at his desk, maps and animal reports scattered around him. She didn't wake him, just covered his shoulders with her wrapper and began organizing his papers. This was their life now, not grand gestures, but small acts of seeing each other's needs. A British conservation group arrived with briefcases full of money, wanting to modernize Ton's methods. Over dinner, their leader patronizingly suggested Adaora might civilize her husband. Ton's grip on his spoon turned his knuckles white, but it was Adaora who spoke. My husband's work protects 5 endangered species. What exactly would you like to modernize? The table fell silent. Later, Ton spun her under the moonlight. My fierce Igbo queen, he murmured against her lips. Back in Enugu, Adaora students staged a walkout when the headmaster tried to cancel her biology field trip. We want real learning, not just textbooks, they chanted. Watching from her classroom window, Adaora saw Ton's influence in their passion for hands-on knowledge. That night, she surprised him by showing up at his camp with 20 teenagers in tow. "Teach them what you taught me," she said. As Ton lit up explaining animal tracks, one girl whispered, "Madam, your husband, he makes science taste like chocolate." Adaora's private diary went missing, the one where she confessed her lingering doubts. Days later, it reappeared with Ton's notes in the margins. Next to her entry, "Will I ever be enough for him?" he'd written, "You were enough from the moment you worried about being enough." She confronted him, furious at the invasion, until he showed her his own journal, left deliberately open on their bed. "My turn," he said quietly. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Ton woke her at midnight to a feast laid out on their porch: roasted corn, succulent bushmeat, and the exact brand of malt drink she'd had at Cafe Sankofa that first day. "You remembered," she gasped. He kissed her palm. "I remember everything." They ate with their fingers, laughing like children, until the village cocks began crowing dawn. When Adaora's cycle was late, panic set in. They hadn't planned for children so soon. Ton found her crying by the river. Without a word, he placed her hand on his chest. "Feel that. However our family comes, that heart will never change its rhythm for you." The next morning, her courses came, relief and strange disappointment mingling. That evening, Ton brought home a puppy. "Practice," he said with a wink. At the New Yam festival, tradition demanded Adaora serve Ton first. She balked. In her family, women ate with the children. The elders murmured. Ton stood, took the bowl, and served her instead. "New traditions for new times," he announced. Later, in their hut, she thanked him. He shrugged. "You're not my servant. You're my heartbeat." That night, they created their own ritual, sharing one bowl, feeding each other between kisses. Ton received word of a rare forest elephant herd near Cameroon, a 2-month expedition. As he packed, Adaora memorized the new lines around his eyes. "I could come," she offered. He shook his head. "Your students need you." At dawn, she pressed a wrapped parcel into his hands, her father's old compass and a photo of them tucked inside a carved wooden case. "So you never lose your way home," she whispered. His embrace left her breathless. When he struck, measured in moments together, but in how deeply you're remembered when apart. The rainy season painted everything in vibrant greens, turning the paths between Adaora's school and Ton's conservation camp into slippery challenges. She'd taken to keeping an extra pair of boots in her car after one particularly muddy incident where she'd arrived to class with her hem caked in red earth. The students had laughed, but then surprised her with a hand-painted sign, "Our muddy, beautiful teacher." Ton framed it for her birthday, his calloused fingers carefully smoothing the edges of the glass. One evening, as the downpour rattled the tin roof of their borrowed cabin, Ton traced the lines of Adaora's poem by lamplight. "This one says you'll outlive me by decades," he murmured. She snatched her hand away, suddenly furious at the thought. "Don't you dare leave me first," she whispered fiercely. The storm outside seemed to hush as he kissed the post point of her wrist, a silent promise. Chinedu's wedding invitation arrived on imported cardstock, his smiling face beside a woman whose calm elegance made Adaora's chest tighten with unexpected envy. Ton found her staring at it by the window. "We could crash it," he offered, wiggling his eyebrows. "I'll wear my leopard print agbada." Her laughter startled a pair of sunbirds from the hibiscus outside. That night, she wrote Chinedu a sincere blessing on homemade paper pressed with wildflowers, Ton's hand steady on her lower back as she sealed the envelope. The village children started calling Adaora East Noni after she organized the protest against the overflowing garbage pits near the school. When the local council ignored their petitions, she arrived at Ton's camp covered in filth, having led the cleanup herself. He didn't flinch from her stench, just handed her a bucket of soapy water. "My warrior queen," he teased, scrubbing her nails with meticulous care. Later, the children presented them with matching crowns woven from recycled wire and bottle caps. Ton's nightmares came rarely but violently, flashes of poachers' machetes and dying animals. Adaora learned to wake him with humming instead of touch, her voice anchoring him back to the present. One moonless night, he confessed, "Sometimes I fear my work takes more than I can give." She pressed her forehead to his. "Then we'll refill you together." The next morning, she started a nature journal for his happier sightings: a frog riding a turtle, a monkey stealing his sunglasses, each entry a tiny bulwark against the darkness. A visiting American researcher condescendingly called their marriage quaint during a conference. Ton's grip on her waist tightened, but Adaora simply smiled and switched to rapid Igbo mid-sentence, watching the woman's confusion grow. Later, over roasted plantains, they invented increasingly ridiculous translations of what she'd actually said. "I definitely mentioned your nose ring looks like a cow's," Tunde insisted, dodging her playful slap. Adaora's mother fell ill suddenly, her usual vigor dimmed to fragile whispers. For 3 sleepless nights, Tunde held vigil with the family, brewing bitter leaf tea exactly as his grandmother had taught him. When Mama finally woke, her first words were, "The Yoruba boy makes better medicine than our people." The room erupted in relieved laughter, but Adaora saw how Ton's hands shook as he passed her the cup, love and terror braided together. They fought only once that season, about Adaora's refusal to quit trekking to remote schools during flood warnings. "Your stubbornness isn't bravery," Tonde shouted, upturning a basket of laundry. She retaliated by sleeping at the staff quarters. At dawn, she found him waiting outside with her favorite puff-puff and a hand-drawn map of safer routes. "Compromise," he said simply, pressing a kiss to her wind-chapped lips. The dry Harmattan winds brought a different kind of challenge: cracked lips, static shocks, and Tonde's old asthma returning with a vengeance. Adaora woke repeatedly to check his breathing, her medical training warring with helplessness. One particularly bad night, she rigged a steam tent from bedsheets and eucalyptus. "Marrying you was my smartest decision," he whizzed into the humid air. She replied by singing his childhood lullaby off-key until his laughter turned to coughing turned to sleep. When Adaora students won the regional science fair using Tonde's wildlife tracking methods, the headmaster reluctantly approved her unconventional curriculum. To celebrate, Tunde took her dancing at a riverside buka where no one knew them. Under the thatched roof, swaying to high-life music thick with talking drums, she realized this was their true marriage, not the ceremonies or documents, but these stolen moments where they existed simply as Adaora and Tunde, 2 souls learning the same rhythm. As he read the approval letter aloud, voice cracking, Adaora silently calculated the commute from her school. Their eyes met in perfect understanding. Some loves required spreadsheets alongside sweet words, shared calendars as much as shared dreams. That night, they marked the future site with palm wine and laughter, their footprints overlapping in the red earth like a promise written in the land itself. The first foundation stones for the conservation hub were laid during a week of unrelenting heat. Adaora watched as Tunde, his back glistening with sweat, helped the village elders position the cornerstone. An old griot sang blessings while children placed offerings of seeds and beads in the cracks between stones. That evening, as fireflies dotted the construction site like living lanterns, Tunde pressed a cement-smeared hand to Adaora's cheek. "Our fingerprints will outlast us," he murmured. She kissed his dirty knuckles, tasting salt and tomorrow. Adaora's school term ended with a parent complaining about her unorthodox methods. The headmaster threatened to revoke her field trips until 20 students staged a sit-in outside his office. Tunde arrived with chilled zobo drinks for the protesters. "Your rebellion needs hydration," he announced solemnly, winking at Adaora. By sunset, the headmaster had relented, though neither of them could stop laughing at his bewildered expression when Tunde presented him with a basket of peace-offering snails. The rainy season brought an unexpected visitor, Tunde's estranged younger brother, Bill, who arrived unannounced with a guitar and a suitcase full of resentment. Adaora woke to their raised voices in the compound and found them nose to nose, arguing in rapid Yoruba. Without a word, she began making breakfast, banging pots louder than necessary. The silence that followed was comical. Over spicy jollof rice, Bill admitted he'd come because their father was ill. That night, Adaora held Tunde as he shook with silent tears, his brother's snores echoing from the guest room. A malaria outbreak swept through the village. Adaora converted their sitting room into a makeshift clinic while Tunde organized mosquito net distributions. For 3 sleepless days, they moved between crying children and anxious elders. On the 4th evening, Adaora collapsed mid-sentence into Tunde's arms. He carried her to bed and sang her childhood lullabies in Gabo Dirubaibo until she smiled through her fever. When she woke, she found Bill awkwardly spoon-feeding her pepper soup while Tunde slept curled on the floor like a guard dog. Bill stayed through the harvest festival. Adaora caught him watching them sometimes, when Tunde fixed her loose braid without looking up from his book, or when she automatically handed him the exact tool he needed for a repair. On his last morning, Bill pressed a folded note into Adaora's hand. "You're the piece he never found at home." The boss left in a cloud of red dust, taking one brother and leaving behind a fragile understanding. The Conservation Hub's opening ceremony coincided with Adaora's 30th birthday. Tunde surprised her by naming the education wing after her father. As the old man cut the ribbon with trembling hands, Adaora saw the exact moment her parents finally understood this wasn't just her loving Tunde, but building a legacy with him. That night, under a full moon, Tunde presented her with 30 handmade papers, each bearing a reason he loved her in swirling calligraphy. Number 17 read, "You argue with thunderstorms and win." A visiting journalist mistook them for siblings during an interview. "No," Tunde said, threading his fingers through Adaora's, "we're the opposite. Chosen family." The resulting article called them, "the couple redefining modern African love," which made them cringe but secretly pleased Adaora's mother, who framed it for her parlor. Patterns, waking moments before his coughing fits began. One particularly bad night, she rigged a steam inhaler from a kettle and towel, humming as he gasped into the vapor. "I choose you," he wheezed afterward, even if it meant breathing through straws forever. She responded by dragging their mattress onto the porch where the air was clearer, wrapping them both in a cocoon of blankets and stubborn hope. The first group of conservation interns arrived, 3 eager university students who stared at Adaora with starstruck expressions. "We read your paper on indigenous science pedagogy," one confessed. Tunde mock-pouted until she kissed his sulky mouth in front of them. Later, watching him teach tracking techniques, Adaora felt a pang of longing so sharp it startled her. That night, she traced the lines of Tunde's palms in the moonlight and whispered, "What if we made someone who has your laugh and my temper?" His stillness lasted just a heartbeat before he pulled her close. A wildfire threatened the northern edge of the conservation area. Tunde was gone for 3 days with the fire brigade while Adaora coordinated supplies from town. When he returned, reeking of smoke and exhaustion, she washed him in the courtyard under the indifferent stars. His skin was hot to the touch, his shoulders raw from carrying water buckets. As she walked, he murmured fragments of stories, a tortoise rescued, a foolish volunteer who tried to take selfies with the flames. Only when he was clean and fed did she press her face to his chest and finally weep. The next morning, they planted 50 saplings along the burn line, their hands finding each other between seedlings. The seasons turned, and with them, their love deepened in ways both quiet and profound, a shared language of touches and glances, the way Ton could predict her coffee cravings before she voiced them, how Adaora started humming his mother's songs while cooking. One ordinary Tuesday, as they repainted the conservation hub sign together, Adaora realized with sudden clarity that this was happiness, not a destination, but the accumulation of days spent choosing each other, again and again, under the watchful eyes of both their ancestors and the wide, waiting sky. The first time Adaora felt the flutter in her womb like a tiny fish turning, she was grading papers under the old baobab tree. She pressed a hand to her belly, the other still clutching a red pen mid-correction. Tunde, sprawled beside her with a field guide open on his chest, noticed her frozen posture instantly. "What is it?" he asked, already half rising. When she guided his palm to the spot, his eyes widened comically. "That's either our child," he whispered reverently, "or you've developed spectacular indigestion." Their laughter startled a family of monkeys in the branches above. Morning sickness arrived with a vengeance. Adaora vomited into the rose bushes while Tunde held back her braids, murmuring encouragement like a boxing coach. "Good form, love. Really committing to it." She threw her slipper at him, then immediately needed it back when nausea struck again. By week 3, he'd perfected a ginger tea recipe and taken over all cooking after she burst into tears at the smell of fried plantains. And turning into a hormonal cliché, she groaned into his shoulder. He kissed her temple. "My favorite cliché." The village women threw Adaora a naming ceremony 4 months early. "So the baby knows it's expected," explained Mama Nkechi as they tied beads around Adaora's swelling waist. Tunde was bad from attending, but found her afterward sitting barefoot by the river, ankles swollen, staring at the dozens of tiny bracelets jingling around her middle. "They've given our child 43 names already," she said faintly. Tunde knelt to press his lips to her belly button. "Let's hope it's a patient baby." Tunde's nightmares changed. Instead of poachers, he dreamed of dropping the baby, of forgetting its name, of being unable to protect it. Adaora woke to find him practicing swaddling with a sack of rice at 3 a.m. "We're going to be terrible at this," he confessed, his voice raw. She guided him back to bed, placing his hand where tiny feet were currently practicing what felt like soccer moves. "Terrible together," she agreed, and felt his laughter rumble against her back. The Conservation Hub's first anniversary celebration coincided with Adaora's 8th month. She waddled through the crowds accepting congratulations, while Tunde gave a speech with one hand permanently outstretched as if to catch her. When the local women presented them with a handmade cradle woven from strong vines, Adaora burst into unexpected tears. "It's just," she hiccuped, "so many people already love this child." Tunde's voice cracked as he thanked them in halting Igbo, and the elders nodded in approval. The rains came early the night Adaora went into labor. Torrents turned the road to the clinic to mud, forcing them to shelter at the Conservation Hub's newly built medical station. Between contractions, Adaora griped, "I told you adding a delivery room was excessive." Tunde, sterilizing equipment with shaking hands, retorted, "Remind me which of us insisted on backup generators." The midwife arrived minutes before the final push, but it was Tunde's hands that first caught their screaming daughter, his tearful Yoruba prayers mingling with Adaora's exhausted Igbo ones. Little Adana refused to sleep unless curled on Tunde's chest. He took to doing paperwork one-handed, the baby's tiny fingers clutching his shirt collar like a lifeline. Adaora would wake to find them both asleep at his desk, father and daughter breathing in perfect sync, ink smudged across the baby's foot where he'd been signing reports. "She's your carbon copy," Adaora whispered once, and Tunde grinned without opening his eyes. "But she has your dramatic sigh. Already perfected it." Herself, mailed an extravagant silver rattle with a note, "May their cries be musical." Even Beo visited, awkwardly rocking Adana while confessing he'd never held a baby before. "You're doing better than Tunde," Adaora lied, watching her husband fake offense as he expertly burped their daughter. The village celebrated Adana's moon naming ceremony with a feast that lasted 3 days. Ton carried her proudly through the crowds, pointing out each relative as Adaora trailed behind, still sour but glowing. When the griot sang Adana's official names, some Igbo, some Yoruba, one even Hausa from Ton's university friend, the baby cooed as if in approval. That night, as fireflies danced around their hut, Adaora traced the new lines around Ton's eyes. "We made a person," she marveled. He kissed her palm, then the sleeping baby's forehead. "We made a future." Adana's first tooth arrived with much fanfare and biting. Ton yelped dramatically during a feeding, making the baby giggle around her new dental weapon. "She's clearly training to be a warrior," he proclaimed, showing off the tiny indentations on his tongue. Adaora rolled her eyes but secretly reveled in these moments, the way Ton celebrated every drool-soaked milestone as if it were a national holiday. When Adana took her first wobbling steps toward a rescued Daika fawn at the conservation center, both parents froze mid-argument about school districts. The fawn, improbably, nuzzled the baby's cheek as if in encouragement. Tons whispered, "Oh, I held galaxies of wonder." Adaora, squeezing his hand too tight, realized with sudden clarity that their love had grown legs now. It would walk into places they couldn't yet imagine, guided by tiny hands they thought to hold on, but never too tightly. The seasons turned, and with them, their family grew, not just in numbers, but in depth. Adaora found Ton one evening teaching Adana to name constellations using only his childhood stories. "This one is grandfather's walking stick," he murmured, tracing Orion's belt with her chubby finger. Watching them, Adaora understood that love wasn't a single story, but an endless library being written every day, in starlight, in footprints left in red earth, in the spaces between shared breaths where whole worlds could bloom. The drought came like an uninvited guest, lingering far past its welcome. Adaora watched the once lush conservation land turn brittle under the relentless sun, while Ton organized water rationing with a quiet desperation that made her chest ache. One evening, she found him kneeling in their patched vegetable garden, whispering to the wilted okra plants like they were old friends. She joined him without a word, their linked hands forming a bridge over the cracked earth. That night, they bathed Adana with a single bucket of water, her delighted squeals echoing off the tin walls as if to defy the dryness. Adana's third birthday party was nearly cancelled when a swarm of locusts descended on the village. Turned, ever resourceful, turned disaster into celebration by teaching the children to make music with the insects' discarded wings. Adaora watched through the kitchen window as he conducted their impromptu orchestra, Adana perched proudly on his shoulders conducting with a carrot stick. Later, when the last guest had gone, their daughter presented them with a carefully saved piece of cake, squashed from being hidden in her pocket all afternoon, but offered with such solemn pride that they ate every crumb. The government inspectors arrived unexpectedly, questioning the conservation hub's water usage during the drought. Adaora, still in her teaching apron, faced them with a calm she didn't feel while Ton distracted Adana by identifying bird calls outside. When one official condescendingly referred to her as the wife, she responded with such precise environmental data that the man actually took notes. That night, as they lay exhausted in bed, Ton traced the tension lines between her eyebrows. "You were magnificent," he murmured. "Also terrifying. I may be slightly aroused." Her laugh shook loose the last of the day's worries. A new teacher arrived at Adaora's school, young, idealistic, and constantly questioning her methods. The frustration came to a head when Miss Chioma called Adaora's nature-based curriculum backwards. That evening, Ton listened quietly as Adaora ranted while pounding yam with unusual violence. The next morning, he appeared at her classroom with 6 rescued hedgehogs and a lesson plan on indigenous ecosystems. Miss Chioma's transformation was immediate and comical. By week's end, she was begging to visit the conservation hub. "You devious man," Adaora accused later, and Ton only grinned around the pencil clamped in his teeth as he fixed Adana's broken toy truck. Adana developed a fever that wouldn't break. For 3 sleepless nights, they took turns sponging her small body with cool water, singing competing lullabies, Adaora's Igbo melodies clashing with Ton's Yoruba ones until the baby weakly requested we both. On the fourth morning, when the fever finally broke, they collapsed together at the kitchen table, Adaora's tears dripping into their shared coffee cup. Tunde pressed his lips to her tangled hair. "We should probably learn some Hausa songs too. Just in case." The first rains after the drought arrived in a torrential downpour that flooded the conservation hub's lower fields. Adaora arrived home to find Tunde and Adana splashing through the muddy water like excited otters, their laughter carrying over the drumming rain. She stood under the eaves watching until Adana spotted her and came running, arms outstretched, shoes long abandoned somewhere. The cold mud squelching between her toes as she joined their dance felt like a baptism, a reminder that some joys could only come after weathering the dry seasons together. The babysitter, Mama Nkechi, armed with enough snacks to survive a siege, shooed them away with instructions to remember why you liked each other before the child. Their borrowed cabin had no electricity and a resident family of geckos, but the view of the river at sunset left them both speechless. That night, lying on two small cots with Tunde's arms around her, Adaora realized with a start that she could still trace the same constellation of moles on his back that she'd memorized a decade ago, familiar yet still thrilling as the day she'd first discovered them. Adana started school, her tiny uniform impossibly crisp on the first day. Tunde, the supposed tough conservationist, wept openly while Adaora, the sentimental teacher, remained dry-eyed until their daughter marched off without a backward glance. "She got your courage," Tunde sniffed into her shoulder. Adaora squeezed his hand. "And your dramatic flair." They celebrated /mourned at their favorite buka, eating spicy suya until their noses ran and pretending not to watch the clock for pickup time. The year's end brought an unexpected honor, a national award for their conservation education partnership. At the ceremony in Abuja, Adaora's speech about bridging traditional knowledge with modern science received a standing ovation. Tunde, never one for prepared remarks, instead led the audience in an impromptu lesson on identifying animal tracks in urban environments. Watching the dignified ministers crawling on the carpet examining hyena prints, actually Adana's doodles, Adaora felt a surge of pride so fierce it stole her breath. Later, in their hotel room, they celebrated by ordering ridiculous room service and slow dancing to silent music, their bodies remembering rhythms older than awards or accolades. Back home, life continued its beautiful, ordinary march. There were parent-teacher meetings and injured animals to nurse, leaky roofs and impromptu living room picnics during power outages. One particularly chaotic Sunday, as Adana helped Tunde fix a broken chair while Adaora tried to salvage what might have been soup, she caught his eye across the mess of their home. His smile, still as devastating as the day they'd met, said everything words couldn't, that this chaos was their masterpiece, this love their greatest conservation project, always growing, always renewable, as endless as the African sky stretching above their intertwined lives. The mango tree they'd planted when Adana was born bore its first real harvest. Adaora stood beneath its branches, the golden afternoon light filtering through leaves as Tunde lifted their now 6-year-old to pluck the ripest fruit. Adana's squeal of triumph when she succeeded echoed through the compound, drawing smiles from even the usually stern Mama Nkechi. That evening, they ate the sun-warmed mangoes with sticky fingers, juice running down their chins as fireflies began their nightly dance. Adaora caught Tunde's eye over their daughter's head, the shared memory of planting the sapling, her heavily pregnant, him carefully packing soil around her swollen ankles, hanging unspoken but vivid between them. A new highway project threatened to cut through the northern edge of the conservation area. Tunde spent weeks at protest meetings while Adaora organized letter-writing campaigns with her students. One particularly heated town hall ended with Tunde being escorted out by security for calling the project manager an ecological terrorist. Adaora found him pacing their backyard at midnight, muttering in Yoruba. Without a word, she handed him Adana's latest drawing, a lopsided but enthusiastic rendering of Daddy's forest. He folded it carefully into his wallet, the paper already smudged from his grip by morning. Adana announced she wanted to be a doctor for animals and people after helping nurse a wounded bush baby back to health. Ton immediately built her a miniature clinic under the baobab tree, complete with a chalkboard for diagnosis. Adaora came home from school to find them solemnly listening to a tortoise's heartbeat with a stethoscope made from recycled tubing. "Patient's prognosis?" she asked, playing along. "Extremely slow but very wise," Adana declared, mimicking Ton's lecturing tone perfectly. That night, as they lay in bed, Ton confessed, "She's going to be so much smarter than us." Adaora pinched his arm. "Already is." The year's dry season brought unexpected visitors, a documentary crew wanting to profile their conservation work. Adaora initially refused, until the producer mentioned they could reach millions of schoolchildren. For 2 weeks, their lives became a whirlwind of cameras and interviews, Adana stealing the show by explaining animal tracks to the baffled sound technician. The night before the crew left, they screened a rough cut under the stars. Seeing their ordinary lives reflected back, Ton's hands gentle on an injured bird's wing, Adaora patiently untangling a student's misunderstanding, Adana's gap-toothed grin as she helped, left them both humbled and strangely seen. Adaora's father suffered a mild stroke. For 3 weeks, she traveled daily to Enugu, returning each night exhausted. Ton quietly took over all her classes, his lesson plans a hilarious mix of conservation science and Yoruba folk tales that the students adored. One particularly difficult evening, she arrived home to find her father's favorite soup simmering on the stove, the recipe painstakingly recreated from Ton's notes during phone calls with her mother. As she took her first sip, the flavors of childhood comfort washing over her, Adana whispered, "Daddy cried when the okra wouldn't thicken right." That night, Adaora held her husband as he finally released the stress he'd been carrying for them all. The documentary aired during prime time, sparking unexpected fame. Strangers stopped them at markets for selfies, while Adana's schoolmates demanded autographs. The attention reached its absurd peak when a Nollywood producer offered to make a fictionalized version of their lives. They declined, but not before Ton jokingly suggested Idris Elba play him. "In your dreams," Adaora retorted, laughing when Adana chimed in, "Daddy, he's too old." Their brief celebrity did bring one wonderful outcome: funding poured in for the conservation hub, allowing them to build a proper wildlife hospital. Ton built a makeshift animal ambulance from an old wheelbarrow, giving rides to squealing children while Adaora organized educational games. Watching their daughter proudly explain each resident animal story to her friends, Adaora felt a familiar lump in her throat. Ton's hand found hers, his palm still careless but gentler now when it touched her. "We made that," he murmured, nodding at Adana's earnest face. "Our best collaboration yet." The rains returned with unusual ferocity, flooding the lower fields again. This time, instead of despairing, the entire village worked together to build proper drainage channels, Ton's conservation knowledge blending with traditional farming techniques in a way that left the agricultural extension officers taking notes. Adaora coordinated the schoolchildren in planting erosion-controlling grasses along the new waterways, their small hands surprisingly deft. That night, as the first real storm of the season lashed their non-secure roof, they lay awake listening to the rhythm. Adana safely tucked between them after a nightmare. "Remember when we thought love was just a feeling?" Ton whispered over their daughter's sleeping head. Adaora kissed his stubborn cheek. "Turns out it's flood control." The letter arrived from Bayo, now working with refugees in Kenya. Enclosed was a photo of him smiling beside a young Somali girl holding a picture Adana had drawn for him of all the animals in Uncle Bayo's new home. Ton stared at it for a long moment before pinning it to their family memory board, right beside Adana's first ultrasound and their wedding photo. That Shabbat, as they lit candles, the tradition Adaora had adopted from a Jewish colleague, Ton added an extra prayer for his brother's safety, in Yoruba, then Hebrew, then Igbo, just to make sure it was heard. The year wound down with quiet triumphs, a rescued pangolin giving birth at the center, Adaora students winning a national science competition, Ton finally mastering her mother's Ofunsola recipe after 7 years of trying. One ordinary Tuesday, As they walked home from the market with Adaora swinging between them, a sudden downpour sent them sprinting for cover under a roadside awning. Soaked and laughing, their daughter's small hands warm in theirs, Adaora realized with sudden clarity that happiness wasn't in the grand moments they'd been recognized for, but in these small, wet pockets of time, the three of them together against whatever weather life brought, always finding shelter in each other. The mango tree they'd planted when Adaora was born bore its first real harvest. Adaora stood beneath its branches, the golden afternoon light filtering through leaves as Tunde lifted their now 6-year-old to pluck the ripest fruit. Adaora's squeal of triumph when she succeeded echoed through the compound, drawing smiles from even the usually stern Momangechi. That evening, they ate the sun-warmed mangoes with sticky fingers, juice running down their chins as fireflies began their nightly dance. Adaora caught Tunde's eye over their daughter's head, the shared memory of planting the sapling, her heavily pregnant, him carefully packing soil around her swollen ankles, hanging unspoken but vivid between them. A new highway project threatened to cut through the northern edge of the conservation area. Tunde spent weeks at protest meetings while Adaora organized letter-writing campaigns with her students. One particularly heated town hall ended with Tunde being escorted out by security for calling the project manager an ecological terrorist. Adaora found him pacing their backyard at midnight, muttering in Yoruba. Without a word, she handed him Adaora's latest drawing, a lopsided but enthusiastic rendering of Daddy's forest. He folded it carefully into his wallet, the paper already smudged from his grip by morning. Adaora announced she wanted to be a doctor for animals and people after helping nurse a wounded bush baby back to health. Tunde immediately built her a miniature clinic under the baobab tree, complete with a chalkboard for diagnosis. Adaora came home from school to find them solemnly listening to a tortoise's heartbeat with a stethoscope made from recycled tubing. "Patient's prognosis?" she asked, playing along. "Extremely slow but very wise," Adaora declared, mimicking Tunde's lecturing tone perfectly. That night, as they lay in bed, Tunde confessed, "She's going to be so much smarter than us." Adaora pinched his arm. "Already is." The year's dry season brought unexpected visitors, a documentary crew wanting to profile their conservation work. Adaora initially refused, until the producer mentioned they could reach millions of schoolchildren. For 2 weeks, their lives became a whirlwind of cameras and interviews, Adaora stealing the show by explaining animal tracks to the baffled sound technician. The night before the crew left, they screened a rough cut under the stars. Seeing their ordinary lives reflected back, Tunde's hands gentle on an injured bird's wing, Adaora patiently untangling a student's misunderstanding, Adaora's gap-toothed grin as she helped, left them both humbled and strangely seen. Adaora's father suffered a mild stroke. For 3 weeks, she traveled daily to Enugu, returning each night exhausted. Tunde quietly took over all her classes, his lesson plans a hilarious mix of conservation science and Yoruba folktales that the students adored. One particularly difficult evening, she arrived home to find her father's favorite soup simmering on the stove, the recipe painstakingly recreated from Tunde's notes during phone calls with her mother. As she took her first sip, the flavors of childhood comfort washing over her, Adaora whispered, "Daddy cried when the okra wouldn't thicken right." That night, Adaora held her husband as he finally released the stress he'd been carrying for them all. The documentary aired during prime time, sparking unexpected fame. Strangers stopped them at markets for selfies, while Adaora's schoolmates demanded autographs. The attention reached its absurd peak when a Nollywood producer offered to make a fictionalized version of their lives. They declined, but not before Tunde jokingly suggested Idris Elba play him. "In your dreams," Adaora retorted, laughing when Adaora chimed in, "Daddy, he's too old." They are brief. Build a proper wildlife hospital. Adaora's 7th birthday party became a village-wide celebration after she requested donations to the center instead of gifts. Tunde built a makeshift animal ambulance from an old wheelbarrow, giving rides to squealing children while Adaora organized educational games. Watching their daughter proudly explain each resident animal story to her friends, Adaora felt a familiar lump in her throat. Ton's hand found hers, his palm still careless but gentler now when it touched her. "We made that," he murmured, nodding at Adana's earnest face. "Our best collaboration yet." The rains returned with unusual ferocity, flooding the lower fields again. This time, instead of despairing, the entire village worked together to build proper drainage channels, Ton's conservation knowledge blending with traditional farming techniques in a way that left the agricultural extension officers taking notes. Adaora coordinated the schoolchildren in planting erosion-controlling grasses along the new waterways, their small hands surprisingly deft. That night, as the first real storm of the season lashed their now-secure roof, they lay awake listening to the rhythm. Adana safely tucked between them after a nightmare. "Remember when we thought love was just a feeling?" Ton whispered over their daughter's sleeping head. Adaora kissed his stubble cheek. "Turns out it's flood control." The letter arrived from Beo, now working with refugees in Kenya. Enclosed was a photo of him smiling beside a young Somali girl holding a picture Adana had drawn for him of all the animals in Uncle Beo's new home. Ton stared at it for a long moment before pinning it to their family memory board, right beside Adana's first ultrasound and their wedding photo. That Shabbat, as they lit candles, a tradition Adaora had adopted from a Jewish colleague, Ton added an extra prayer for his brother's safety, in Yoruba, then Hebrew, then Igbo, just to make sure it was heard. The year wound down with quiet triumphs, a rescued pangolin giving birth at the center, Adaora students winning a national science competition, Ton finally mastering her mother's ofensola recipe after 7 years of trying. One ordinary Tuesday, as they walked home from the market with Adana swinging between them, a sudden downpour sent them sprinting for cover under a roadside awning. Soaked and laughing, their daughter's small hands warm in theirs, Adaora realized with sudden clarity that happiness wasn't in the grand moments they'd been recognized for, but in these small, wet pockets of time, the three of them together against whatever weather life brought, always finding shelter in each other. The year began with Adana declaring she wanted to learn all the languages, a demand that sent Ton scrambling to teach her Yoruba nursery rhymes while Adaora dug out her old Igbo primers. Their compound soon echoed with the sound of their daughter cheerfully mixing all three languages into incomprehensible sentences that somehow everyone understood. "She's creating her own dialect," Ton marveled one evening as Adana explained a drawing using Igbo verbs, Yoruba nouns, and English adjectives. Adaora smiled, thinking how their love had done the same, created something new from beautiful fragments. A rare snowstorm hit the northern regions, sending confused wildlife migrating southward. The conservation hub became a temporary refuge for disoriented animals, including a family of endangered pangolins. Adaora converted the school's auditorium into an emergency classroom where students documented the unusual migration patterns. Ton, who'd never seen snow, kept bringing Adana cups of rapidly melting ice, declaring it winter magic. Their laughter that night as they huddled under blankets, Adana insisting snow was just rain that forgot to be warm, was warmer than any fire. Adana developed a fascination with space after seeing a documentary about the stars. For weeks, their dinner conversations revolved around black holes and supernovas. Ton, ever the pragmatist, built a makeshift planetarium from mosquito nets and glow-in-the-dark paint, only to get hopelessly tangled in the strings during the inaugural tour. Adaora found them both giggling under a starry net, Adana patiently explaining that Pluto was not a planet anymore. "Daddy, keep up." That night, watching them trace constellations on the ceiling, she realized their daughter was already seeing further than they ever had. The government finally approved Ton's decade-long petition to protect the river basin. The victory celebration lasted 3 days, with Adaora students performing a play about water conservation and Adana leading a parade of children wearing handmade animal costumes. That night, as the last guest departed, Ton stood silently by the riverbank, his reflection shimmering in the moonlight. Adaora joined him, their shoulders touching without words. When he finally spoke, "This will outlast us both," his voice held the weight and wonder of every struggle it had taken to get here. Adaora was offered a prestigious teaching fellowship abroad, 6 months in London with opportunities to expand her nature-based curriculum globally. That night, as they pored over the paperwork, Tunde surprised her by insisting she go. "We'll manage," he said, bouncing a sleeping Adaora on his knee. "Besides, think of all the British biscuits you can send us." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. It was Adaora who voiced the real fear the next morning. "What if you like it there too much to come back?" Adaora knelt to meet her daughter's worried gaze. "The moon could crash into the sun and I'd still find my way back to you too." The separation was harder than any of them anticipated. Video calls couldn't capture Tunde's scent or the exact shade of Adaora's laughter. Adaora filled her loneliness by exploring every museum and park, collecting stories to bring home like presents. Tunde sent daily field reports: Adaora's lost tooth, the new baby monkeys at the center, his disastrous attempt at baking her coconut bread. One particularly homesick night, Adaora opened a care package too. The taste of home brought unexpected tears. Halfway through her fellowship, Adaora surprised them by flying home for a weekend. She arrived to find Tunde asleep at his desk, Adaora curled in his lap like a much younger child, both surrounded by construction paper and glue sticks, evidently mid-project when exhaustion took over. The sight of them, so perfectly themselves, filled her with a longing sharper than any homesickness. She didn't wake them, just draped a blanket over their shoulders and began quietly making dinner. When they finally stirred, Adaora's sleepy cry of "Mommy," and Tunde's wordless embrace said everything 6 weeks apart had taught them about absence and belonging. The fellowship's end brought unexpected opportunities, book deals, speaking engagements, even a tentative documentary series. Adaora stood at a crossroads, dizzy with possibilities, until Tunde placed Adaora's latest drawing in her hands, a stick figure family standing between an oversized school and forest, the sun smiling overhead. "We'll grow wherever you plant us," he said simply. That night, as Adaora slept between them, still not quite ready to let her mother out of reach, they made plans to expand the Conservation Hub's education programs, weaving Adaora's new global perspective into their local roots. Their 10th wedding anniversary passed quietly, just a picnic by the river where they'd first said "I love you." Adaora, now 8, proudly presented them with a handmade coupon book for one free hug anytime and no arguing for a whole day, maximum 5 minutes. As the sun set, painting the water gold, Tunde produced a tattered envelope, the original note he'd left in her book at Cafe Sankofa all those years ago. "I kept it as proof," he admitted when Adaora gasped. "Proof of what?" she asked. "That the best things in life find you when you're busy doing what you love." The seasons turned, as they always did, bringing both challenges and joys, a failed grant application balanced by Adaora winning the school spelling bee, a bout of malaria offset by the unexpected arrival of twin giraffes at the conservation center. Through it all, their love remained not a perfect sanctuary, but a living thing, breathing, growing, occasionally stumbling, yet always finding its way back to the simple truth they discovered years ago, that happiness wasn't a destination, but the sum of countless ordinary moments, carefully gathered and cherished like Adaora's collection of river stones, each one imperfect, yet together, something unbreakable and beautiful. The year Adaora turned 9, she declared herself too old for bedtime stories, a pronouncement that lasted exactly 3 nights before she crept back in, blanket dragging behind her, muttering about checking if Daddy remembered the voices right. Tunde, of course, launched immediately into their favorite Yoruba folktale with exaggerated character voices, while Adaora pretended not to notice the damp spot on her shoulder where their daughter's head rested a little too heavily. Later, when they tucked her back into her own bed, Adaora whispered, "She'll always come back," and Tunde's knowing smile in the moonlight said he understood she wasn't just talking about bedtime. A Hollywood producer flew in, offering ridiculous sums to film a fictionalized version of their lives. Over dinner at the fanciest hotel in Enugu, Adaora asked bluntly, "Will the movie show how Daddy burns rice every time?" The producer's confused "no" made her shrug. "Then it's not real." They declined politely, but not before Ton jokingly suggested they cast him as himself. The producer's pained smile lasted exactly until Adana demonstrated her hyena call directly into his ear. The Conservation Hub's 10th anniversary celebration became a 3-day festival, with former students returning as doctors, environmental lawyers, even one astronaut who video called from the International Space Station. Adaora stood beside Ton watching their now teenage interns lead educational tours, marveling at how their little dream had taken root. That night, as fireworks painted the sky, Ton pressed something into her hand, a rusted old key. From the first padlock on the first gate, he murmured. Adaora closed her fingers around it, this tangible piece of their history, and thought how strange it was that something so small could unlock something so infinite. Adana hit puberty with the force of a tropical storm, 1 minute clinging to them like a koala, the next slamming doors over unreasonable requests like showering. Ton took to leaving encouraging notes in her textbooks, "Your brain is beautiful, please stop rolling your eyes at us," while Adaora instituted mandatory family walks, where most of the talking happened sideways, while moving, when it somehow felt safer. One particularly rough night, after a screaming match about phone privileges, Adaora found Ton sitting outside Adana's locked door, quietly singing the Yoruba lullaby that had always calmed her as a baby. On the other side of the wood, silent sobs gave way to hiccuping breaths as the song worked its old magic. A viral article dubbed them Africa's green power couple, bringing both admiration and absurd scrutiny. When a lifestyle magazine demanded a photo shoot in their natural habitat, they complied, but only if they could feature real conservation work. The resulting spread showed Adaora knee-deep in a frog survey while Ton demonstrated proper python handling, the bemused models relegated to holding clipboards. Adana photobombed the cover shot, making rabbit ears behind the terrified-looking journalist. "That's our girl," Ton whispered proudly when they saw the proofs. Ton's father passed quietly in his sleep. The funeral in Ibadan was a blur of relatives and rituals, Adana clinging to her grandfather's walking stick like an anchor. That night, after everyone had left, Ton disappeared. Adaora found him at the empty conservation hub, sitting in the moonlight with the old tortoise he'd rescued years ago, the one his father had teasingly called "your first child." She sat beside him as he wept into the animal's rough shell, the stars, bearing silent witness. When he finally spoke, he never said he was proud. Adaora placed his hand over her heart. "He told me every time we visited." Adana's high school science fair project, a model of sustainable urban planning based on termite mounds, won national attention. Watching their daughter confidently explain biomimicry to government officials, Adaora saw flashes of Ton's passion and her own pragmatism woven into something entirely new. Afterward, as they celebrated with overpriced hotel cake, Adana dropped her teenage nonchalance just long enough to whisper, "I want to change the world like you guys." Ton's hug lifted her off her feet despite her squealed protest, while Adaora blinked back sudden tears. A surprise anniversary party organized by Adana and their former students left them speechless. The center was transformed with photos from their journey, Ton sweaty and young building the first fence, Adaora hugely pregnant teaching under the baobab, Adana at every age helping with animals. The piece de resistance. A family tree mural where every leaf bore the name of someone whose life they touched. Adaora traced their daughter's handiwork in the careful lettering, realizing with a start that love, like conservation, was really just planting seeds you might never see bloom. The year's dry season brought the worst bushfires in memory. For 3 sleepless weeks, Tunde and his team battled the blaze while Adaora coordinated evacuations and shelters. When the rains finally came, they stood together surveying the charred land, hands linked, too exhausted for words. It was Adana who broke the silence, kneeling to point at the first green shoot pushing through ash. "See," she said, her voice equal parts challenge and hope. Ton's calloused hand found Adaora's, their fingers intertwining automatically as they faced this newest beginning together, beaten but unbroken, their love like the resilient earth beneath them, forever finding ways to renew. As Adana prepared for university abroad, or only for undergrad, relax, their home became a whirlwind of packing lists and last-minute panics. The night before departure, they all ended up crammed in her childhood bed like when she was small, retelling favorite stories. When Adana sleepily murmured, "Tell me again how you fell in love," Tunde launched into an embellished version featuring a dramatic rainstorm and heroic book rescue. Adaora let him ramble, watching their daughter's eyelids flutter closed, knowing this was just another beginning disguised as an ending. Later, as they stood on the porch watching dawn break, Tunde's arm heavy around her shoulders, she realized love wasn't about holding on or letting go, but the courage to do both at once, again and again, as long as the seasons kept turning.